I'd like to know if masturbation is a sin.
Okay, straight to the point there with that question. So, Pete.
Let me go to two famous psychological doctors, Dr. Dobbins and Dr. Dobson. Yeah. And both really address this in depth. So if to go in depth, I would recommend you Dr. Dobbins and Dr. Dobson. They really go in depth. I want to approach this with the fact that we're warned in Scripture about anyone who commits sexual sin sins against the body. Every other sin is outside the body. So I would pre-warn that when it comes time for this particular sexual sin, and there's major problems today because of young men that have fallen into this, that they cannot have a normal relationship. And there's so many studies that have done on this, that now there's no performance when it comes time of actually getting married. And I've heard testimonies of this of others. This is a sin that is against you, and you really don't want to enter into that type of sin. It has ramifications that you don't want to pay.
Yeah, good point. Dr. Glaze.
Well, you know, in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, it talks about avoiding fornication.
Yeah.
And let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband. And let the husband render to the wife her due benevolence, and likewise the wife unto the husband. For the wife hath not the power over her body, but the husband, and likewise the husband hath not power over his own body, not the wife. Defraud not one another.
Yeah.
You know, you have to ask the question, and I think this answers the question, what is the purpose for sex? You know, and sex is to be carried out within the confines of a marriage relationship. And masturbation, to me, just in these scriptures that we read, violates three principles in this passage. First of all, masturbation is sex disconnected from a relationship.
Right.
Second, masturbation is keeping one's body to their self and not sharing it with another. And then thirdly, masturbation is done alone and not together. Yeah. So, and I know there can be some arguments that, well, you know, what about husbands and wives that, you know, are together and they, you know, so, but I'm just saying it's actually a violation of this passage right here.
Because masturbation is almost always connected to fornication or adultery in the mind, you know, of some sort. But
now, to be fair, can we throw this out real quick? So these guys might be able to answer this. What happens when a spouse dies? That's a whole different story.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, you know, one of the things I've heard too, I'm going to springboard off that because something that I've heard recently, like a lot of people that are on the road, they will use FaceTime, but then, you know, you can kind of fill in, I mean, so like within a marital context.
Fill in the blank.
So, I mean, so that's kind of, I mean, that's another conversation. I know we're running out of time here, but I agree with these gentlemen, what they're saying, that it's a misuse. As well. Yes. Right. It's because God, and I think when you arouse those marital passions, there's no place to go but up. You have to keep going with that. It's not like, well, if I do it one time, I'll be good. No, you're going to want it the next day and the next day. And usually most people that do that turn into addicts. And it goes into a lot of crazy stuff. So.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, sex is the gift of God, as you gentlemen said, and it is to be between a man and a woman. And part of it is for pleasure. It's just, you know, it's not just as the early church said, well, it has to be for children only because, you know, any pleasure from sex is bad. That's wrong. That's not true. But to use sex in a way to pleasure yourself, as Dr. Glaze said, I really like what you said, Dr. Glaze, about, you know, those three principles. But I do think it's even spoken of in Scripture. You have words, so fornication is porneia, sexual immorality, which is the big word. But then you have uncleanness and lewdness. You know, the works of the flesh are evident, which are adultery, fornication. Now that's sex in different relationships. But then it says uncleanness, lewdness. And uncleanness in the Old Testament was the result of an emission of semen. Right. And so you do have, I think it addressed, a new translations say impurity. But impurity, I think it assumes a kind of masturbation type sin.
Yeah, very good. Wow. I mean, it is a good question, but again, clearly a sin related to sexual immorality.